So here's the key. You think about the big problems we have, why the church isn't doing something. One, we just don't have the theology that compels us to do it. So you could change all the laws you want to say churches can now, once again, do anything they want in the area of politics, which they did before 1954. That's a key date that I'll talk about in a minute. But even if we lifted all the restrictions, how many churches have a theology in place where they would do something about it? Okay? Again, the predominant theology is, in effect, is that we're fishers of men, not cleaners of the aquarium, and we don't have anything to do with that stuff. Okay? And that's why it's not dealt with in the churches. So here's how we got to having any restrictions at all, because as we've traced the history of the First Amendment, and especially of religion, what we've got going on is, at one time, the church, rightly so, was unfettered in anything it wanted to do. I mean, except commit crimes. If the pastor or the congregation felt they wanted to endorse Jesus for an election and not endorse Satan, okay, they were free to do that. So it's only, and again, you want to see how this was done, look at the history of it, how we got to any restrictions on the church with respect to politics. First, something you probably wouldn't associate with it up front, but would be the passing of the 16th Amendment, okay? 16th Amendment, 1913, was passed an income tax that could be, given among the states. Well, that includes a corporate tax as well as a personal income tax. So what you have now is that now the federal government can tax persons. Corporations are legal persons, okay? So now, how do you keep the government from controlling the church? Well, now we're going to give you an exemption from it. And by the way, this is how they always get legislation passed, past the church. Well, we're going to pass this, but we're going to exempt the Christians and the religious people initially. And that's how these things get passed in, well, we're going to pass, we're going to put homosexuality, GLTDB stuff on in our family codes and everything else. But because right now there's a ministerial exemption, the churches are exempt from having to follow it, okay? But what happens 20 years later in the middle of the night in a rider on a bill? We cut out the exemption, okay? So this gets new footing in the culture. It gets established after 10 or 20 years, and they get rid of the religious exemption for it, okay? So this is what's going on. In 1913, passed the 16th Amendment. Now you have the federal income tax, but the church is exempt, okay? So what does that mean? Your church is a legal entity. I mean, it doesn't have to be, but almost every church probably every church you're in is a 501c3 religious corporation. And there are different kinds of nonprofit corporations. That's actually one of my areas of legal practice. I do writs appeals, First Amendment law, and also do nonprofit religious corporation law. So I handle litigation, things like that for churches. So in this area, though, so you are a corporation, which I can tell you this, I handle church litigation. Most people can't even find their corporate bylaws, okay, at the churches. And I can say when it comes to a lawsuit, that's when you find out you should have been following them, because it hurts a lot after that if you're not following it. So these are the kinds of things, just as a FYI. But, so you got the 16th Amendment, now it's corporation, now you have to be a corporation and you have to qualify for the exemption as a 501c3 religious exempt corporation. Well, now here's what came after Everson in 1947. Now the government starts getting more aggressive as far as, now we need to make the public square more naked and secularized. So what do we do now? Now we need to restrict the churches. And 1954, this is when LBJ was the president of pro tem of the Senate, not yet, vice president or president, is he actually attached a rider to a bill in the middle of the night introducing 501c3 political speech restrictions, okay? Why? Because they had a number of conservative churches in his home district, in his home state, that were basically advocating against him, so he wanted to shut them up. So again, what today we call earmarking, and there it was just a midnight rider on a bill that got passed. Now, ever since then, it was supposed to only restrict certain things, but it's interpreted to saying, ultimately, churches cannot be involved in politics. You can't endorse a candidate. Okay, where before that it was you did what you feel the Lord was moving you to do, to impact society. Okay, so that's 1954, and ever since then, between the tax courts and decisions, what you've got going on now is you don't even have to endorse a candidate, but if you even impliedly endorse a candidate, you can't even say vote for the conservative as opposed to the liberal if there's a clear conservative or liberal running, because they can take that as an implied endorsement of a candidate, and you can lose your 501c3 tax exempt status because of it. So that's where we're at, and like too many things going on in the church that are run on ignorance, this is one of those areas. You have elders and pastors that know nothing about the law in this area. They don't even know where the line is drawn. So even if they had any inclination to do it, they stay way over here to make sure that they don't cross the line. They do nothing, okay? Some of the churches, they don't even want to register people to vote and pass out neutral voters' guides because they're afraid they might cross that line. But see, that's done out of ignorance. It's not done out of an informed stance. Because what we do know is that the law is clear on what churches can and can't do, what pastors can and cannot do. First, I think about this. You as an individual citizen, as a Christian, you've got free speech, free religion. You can go out and campaign, do everything you want. It's when it gets to corporate activities, things connected with the 501c3, that it becomes an issue. So you acting as an individual, a pastor acting as an individual, clearly apart from the church, they can do what they want. We've seen this in recent years. Some of you may have noticed in the last probably 5 or 6 years, James Dobson has spent more time saying, I'm personally endorsing this person, not as head of Focus on the Family or whatever, but he's gone out and lent his credibility to a number of candidates over the last 6 or 8 years. Again, but he makes clear that he follows the guidelines. Well, and guess what? Prominent pastors, if they wanted to, they could go out and do the same thing if they wanted to do it. They thought it was important enough to do so, to help certain people get elected. Now, getting into the wisdom of it, the fact is you're there to be a pastor of a church, which includes, teaching people about all areas of life. But, at some point, in the church, sheep are stubborn, right? And they don't always come along if you think it's a good idea or you're doing something new. I mean, you move the piano from the left to the right side of the platform, and you're going to get a congregational meeting sometimes. So, trying to do something new that might be controversial can be problematic. So that's what's in place right now. It's these 1954 political speech restrictions. Now, realistically, we should scrap them. There should be no restrictions on the church. But see, the way the liberals see this and the way the government currently sees this is that because you get a tax exemption, see, you are essentially getting paid by the government, so that your tax exemption shouldn't be used to endorse a candidate, okay? So it's the wrong flow of money that they see it on the tax system, but they're seeing it as essentially paying you by giving you a tax exemption, and you're not allowed to have endorse a candidate with it. So just as government, which is right now the establishment test, it's the endorsement test. Government can't endorse religion. They said the lemon test, like I said, it keeps dying, but occasionally it pops its head up again. But now it's the endorsement test. Government can't endorse religion. That's the basic test. But it's also the contrary in the church. The church can't endorse a political candidate or a party. Okay? So it's the same basic test that has ended up in the church. Now, what's being done right now to try and curb this stuff? What's been in Congress for the last 10 years. It was introduced, I think, the year 2000. North Carolina congressman has introduced the House of Worship Political Speech Restoration Act. Okay, and what does it do? It essentially eliminates the 1954 political speech restrictions. Says, you know what? Forget all of this. Looking. When Jesse Jackson or somebody else goes to a pulpit and what they say and what they do. Should the government really be monitoring who speaks in our churches and how much of these things are going on? And so enough people, every Congress that's happened after that, so every 2 years you got a new Congress, the bill's been reintroduced, had a few more people sign on to it. But this is one thing you can do to encourage people to promote, encourage, and pass the House of Worship Free Speech Restoration Act. Now, in that vein, we're going to cover the things you can and can't do. But the Alliance Defense Fund is the largest and most well-funded of the conservative/Christian legal defense organizations. There's a number of those that I work with. I've worked with ADF at some point, Pacific Justice Institute, Advocates for Faith and Freedom. There are a lot of these groups around where, there's a religion issue going on, you get sued. I'm an affiliate attorney with the Pacific Justice Institute and things like that. But point is, there are a lot of these groups around. There are enough out there that'll take your case, if you get sued. But one thing in the last couple of years that's happened with the Alliance Defense Fund, which I appreciate the intent of it, but I think it's the wrong timing on it. And this is their pulpit initiative that they had the last couple of years. And what they were doing is to say, let's get pastors to go out and essentially endorse a candidate from the pulpit, beg the IRS to sue them so that they can turn around and get a case that they can take up to the Supreme Court and hopefully reverse, these 1954 political speech restrictions. Now, again, I can see, that's good, because guess what? That's what the ACLU does. That's what the left does, is they try and go and look for test cases. And then what they'll do is they'll find someone with standing. To bring a lawsuit, you have to have standing. You actually have a personal stake in the outcome of the action. Okay, there's very little things for which you have citizen standing. I don't like a law, so I want to go in the court and challenge it. You can't do that. You have to have there has to be an issue in controversy with you personally, and you have to have a stake in the outcome. There's a couple of exceptions to that in constitutional law. But, so again, on our side, that's also a good strategy to do sometimes. But in this case, what's at risk? Your church is, even a medium-sized church, you have probably $1 million, $2 million budget every year. That's tax-free. Think of the property that you have, okay? That's tax exempt. What happens if you, just by saying, I want to be able to endorse a candidate, you challenge it, goes up to the Supreme Court, you lose? What happens? You lose your tax exempt status, and then a third to half of your tithe money is going to pay taxes instead of going to ministry, okay? Now the fact is, this is wrong, but why don't we try to pass the House of Worship, Political Speech Restoration Act, okay? Do some other things. Or even if this were passed, now pastors can endorse candidate. Do we have enough of a movement theologically in the churches to say people are going to do something about it? No, you'll be able to endorse a candidate. So I think at this point, while that's a good idea to have this overturned and challenge it in the courts, probably what you do is find a small podunk church that's about to close and have them challenge it, okay? That don't have a lot to lose, don't own property and things like that, because I think that'd be a wiser way to promote this. So again, there's things like that. So now I want to give you a little bit on here's what you can do, and the handouts I'll give you and provide for you will give you all the documentation for this, but you can get an idea of here's the line of demarcation to set. You can go up to here and not further in doing these kind of activities in your church, all right? And you can sort of check them off as you go if your church is doing any of these. First, a lot of churches do this, voter registration drives, okay? Voter registration drives. So churches can conduct nonpartisan voter registration drives. You can't just have the Democrat registration drive or the Republican registration drive or something like that. It has to be nonpartisan. So you can contact the county registrar, get all sorts of forms to register people to vote, and you can set up your Citizen Sunday, Salt and Light Ministry, or whatever you have, and you can register people to vote. Okay, not a problem. You want your people at least, at least be registered to vote, so that if you decide you want to get educated on it, you can go vote when you go to do that. So, but the point is that nonpartisan means it can't implicitly or explicitly endorse any candidate or any party. Okay, and again, there's certain guidelines for that, which we'll give you. Next, okay, distributing materials. Okay. You can put out all sorts of materials about politically related matters. Okay? Churches may allow the distribution of nonpartisan voter education materials. In other words, it's issue-oriented. Okay? You can put all sorts of things out there. If there's a proposition or an idea that's being floated in the election, you can distribute all sorts of material in your churches on that, as long as it does not endorse a particular candidate or party. Okay? I don't know about you, but I don't know if your churches even do that. Pro-life. I've come across churches, supposedly conservative evangelical churches, they won't even take a stand on pro-life versus pro-death because it might offend people in the congregation. It's like, if you won't take a stand on that, what will you take a stand on as far as public policy? And then these were folks, I'll tell you, when it came to another church, I won't name the name, but talked to a couple of the elders, and they just, we don't want to take a stand on this because X, Y, Z. It might be offensive to people in the congregation on the homosexual marriage issue. They didn't want to take a stand on that. So this is how reticent our church leaders have become in taking any stance, because there's a general ignorance about what you can and should do in the public square. So anyway, that's when. So literature distribution, what can you do? When the next round of elections come up, guess what? You can put together all sorts of handouts as long as they're neutral. They don't endorse a candidate or party. Ask your elders, Salt and Light Ministry, pastor, to be able to make these available for people. In fact, it'd be even nice that have the pastor discuss it from the pulpit, which is okay. You can talk about issues. Hell, you just can't endorse candidates. Not a problem. Next, okay, here's one that some churches do, but very few. You want to educate your people on the candidates? You can have a candidate forum at your church. You want to hear what all the candidates have to say for your congregation? Invite all of the candidates. It can't be partisan, okay? But have a candidate forum. Invite all of the candidates. They're invited and allowed to speak. And you can now say, all the candidates, what do you think about abortion? What do you think about homosexual marriage? What do you think about, and it can't be slanted one way or another, but here's the issue. We want to hear what you think about it, okay? This happened in the last, in fact, Saddleback Church had this in the last election with Barack Obama and John McCain. That was a candidate forum. They were permitted to do that, okay? Would it be great, think about it, even if we knew how to evaluate judicial candidates, to at your church invite, all the candidates that are running for local judge positions and say, tell me what it means to be a good judge and how you're going to follow the Constitution. Invite them in a candidate forum. Okay? So I'll tell you who knows the good judges, the attorneys, okay, that have to go in the courts all the time. And I can tell you as an attorney, when you go to court, the good judges are the ones that, especially at the trial level, at that point, liberal and conservative don't usually make as much difference. It's at the appellate level. The good judges are the ones that actually read your material and rule based on the law, okay? Because half the judges don't read your stuff and they make it up as they go, and they challenge you to take them up on a writ, okay? Because that's what they do. You've spent hours and hours putting together a brief, a motion, preparing for a motion hearing. You go in, the law is clearly on your side, and you can tell the judge just didn't even read it. And then it's like, but Your Honor, hey, are you challenging me? It's like, hey, but what about this? Hey, we're done, goodbye. So I just spent 20 hours researching and writing this brief. And you didn't even read it, okay? The attorneys know who the good judges are and who the bad judges are, at least at the trial level. At the appellate level, that's where you see more interpretive discretion going on, because the lower judges are already bound by law. They have no interpretive discretion in those things. So that's where it gets a little more fuzzy. So anyway, think about a candidates forum for your local church. Now, probably, and you think about what kind of forum might be important. Do you need a candidates forum for water district, or something? I don't know. But how about school board? So you talk about something that's of interest to the church. Invite the, either the college school board, the local school board. Who's making policy for what's going to be in the public school for most of the kids that they're not going to private Christian school that are in that local area? If you want to love your neighbor as yourself, how protect little lambs from bad ideas, invite the school board candidates in for a candidate forum. See where they're at. So again, you can do that. It's not a problem as long as you endorse. Speaking at church services, okay? candidates or churches may allow candidates and elected officials to speak at church services. Okay, that is permitted by the code. When churches do invite candidates to speak at the service, they can do it either in their capacity as a candidate or as an individual. Okay. Now, here's the key restriction, though. Is if the purpose of the presentation is political in nature, for example, it's a candidate forum or a campaign speech, the church must invite all of the candidates seeking the same office. Okay? And that's essentially, you invite them to speak at the church, that's candidates forum. But let's say you know personally in your church there's somebody running for office or something that is a committed, true, born-again Christian, and as long as it's nonpartisan, they're just simply there to give their testimony or something like that, then you don't have to invite all the other candidates. Okay? So again, and there's additional guidelines for that, but no, there are ways to showcase people in your church that you think are good candidates without endorsing them. You just have to be very careful to follow the guidelines so there's no implicit endorsement of that particular candidate. So there already are things we can do. See, we don't have to thumb our nose at the IRS right now and say, I endorse Bob, okay, and challenge it. We can do a lot of things here already that we're not doing generally to even deal with having candidates in to give us their positions. Okay, other things. This is a big one because when you think about the church and social action, as you consider what the church used to do, I mentioned this in the morning lecture, when you had churches that had the proper theological models in place, they saw not only the work of teaching, but the work of the deacons ministry as necessary. And that's why it was the church, for up in the United States up until FDR, that primarily took care of the widow and the orphan, built hospitals and so forth. It's the church that did charity to take care of people. All right? It's only after FDR and then after LBJ's Great Society that we began to see now we have this giant welfare state where the government does it. Right? But prior to this time, again, for almost 200 years, it was the churches, the religious organizations that were in charge of charity. Okay? That's why we think about when a kid was an orphan, where did they go? They went to a religious orphanage. That was take care of the church did that. See, who takes care of the widow and the orphan? The Catholics, the Protestants, these are the ones that do it. And they help adopt. I helped a couple of years ago, I helped start a ministry. It's called His Children that helps churches start foster care and adoption ministries. Okay, why? Because we need to put the rubber where the road, put our mouths where put our feet where our mouths are. If we want to talk about the government getting out of the business, where are the conservative churches willing to do this? Okay, so where are we trying to have help orphan kids and take care of the widow and take care of the orphan? So let's get in the business of doing this because there's also great Christian organizations out there like Olive Crest, that do adoption, foster care, things like that. But guess what? They need to work with churches to help funnel people into them because they're restricted by the state right now from being able to, they can't just say, we want Christians' parents to come in. If a homosexual couple comes into them, they have to take them. They can't turn them away because they are bound by the state laws. They don't get an exemption. So what can we do about it? We can advocate for all sorts of social issues, and then hopefully in our churches see that as part of our diaconate, part of our deacons' ministries. So instead of, what does the deacons' ministry do at your church? Probably cleans the church after they're done or something. As opposed to, how do we take care of the widow and the orphan? Yeah, we do need to clean up the church afterwards. That's good after the service. But let's get back to doing the business of the whole business of the church, not just preaching the word. So here's what we can do. For advocacy of issues, okay, churches may engage in issue advocacy, spending no more than an insubstantial amount of the church's budget on it. Now, what does this mean? Public charities, churches, synagogues are permitted to engage in an insubstantial amount of lobbying activity. Did you know your church can lobby for certain legislation? You can actually be lobbyists. Right? Bet you didn't know that. That's permitted by the tax code. Okay? Definition of lobbying activities includes voters' initiatives, ballot propositions, constitutional amendments, and referendums. Okay? You can do that. Okay? Not for candidates, but things that are issue-oriented. Okay? That's the key. When you talk about, again, it's legislative. It's not for political endorsements or candidates. So the question is, and this was the IRS tax case law on it, it says not an insubstantial, okay, or permitted to engage in an insubstantial amount of lobbying. Well, there are two basic court cases on this. One says a church did about 5% of its budget on legislative activity, and it was found not to have exceeded the IRS quota of what is insubstantial. Okay, so minimally 5% is okay. But there was another court case, different district, different jurisdiction, that took this, and a church was doing almost 10%. So, and they found that still didn't violate it. So, safe harbor, 5%. Okay. There hasn't been a Supreme Court decision on this, so we don't know. But the point is, if you think about this, that you could actually engage in pro-life legislative activity in your church, trying to get this stuff passed. Okay? You can do that if you don't spend more than 5% of your resources on it. So I'll bet that was a surprise to you. I could tell somebody, hey, that is a surprise. We can do that. But that's why I say it's good to get informed. Okay? How about, what else can you do? Educating your congregation about these things. Churches may educate members of the congregation about pending legislation. There's pending legislation in the federal House of Representatives, the federal Senate, or the state assembly or the state Senate. You can educate your congregation on what's going on with that legislation. Tell them what's going on, and by issue advocacy, again, you can help them think about it. Okay? So, but the difference here is going to be, when you think about attempting to influence legislation by contacting or urging others to contact members of a legislative body with the purpose of proposing, supporting, or opposing legislation is considered lobbying. And we're talking about by the church, not you privately. You can do as much time as you want privately as a Christian doing it. We're talking about a church or an agent of the church, okay? It's considered lobbying as long as you spend an insubstantial amount of church resources on it, 5% or less, safe harbor, you can do it, okay? Try and influence the passing of legislation, okay? Also, again, educating the public without any form of advocacy is not restricted. So church leaders are not prohibited from speaking about important issues of public policy. Here you're saying, if I want to contact the legislator, my congressman, and say, I think this is a good piece of legislation, let me help draft it for you, and let's get it done, and I spent no more than 5% of our church resources on it, that's okay. 100% of your time, if you want, you decide you're going to preach on what's a biblical view of marriage and against homosexual marriage. You're going to preach on the meaning of life, what it means to be a person under God. You can spend all your time on that kind of issue advocacy, and there's no restriction, okay? And to help people understand it. But again, how many people are going to take the time to try and understand what's a biblical view of, is biblical economics, as we think about it, does it lean more capitalistic, socialistic? How do we think about those things? I mean, you can seriously try and tell me the Bible has no opinion on economics? Sure it does. Thou shalt not steal. Well, there it is. There's private property, okay? You have to assume there's private property to be able to steal, okay? The government's figured that one out. They know how to steal, right? Okay, good. So, all right, so now a few do's and don'ts about pastors, okay? Now, why pastors is distinct from the church? Because pastors can and do have a lot of influence. Again, especially locally, sometimes there'll be a well-known pastor who can influence local politics. Now, I give the example of this. I have a good friend of mine, a former Talbot student. His name's Chad Vegas. He's the pastor of Sovereign Grace Church in Bakersfield. And I know him, he's a good friend of mine, but also I helped him plant the church. I actually wrote his bylaws for him, helped write his doctrinal statement, trained his elders. I'm on his advisory board, and I'm their church attorney. So yes, I'm familiar with what's going on up there. But here's the interesting note about Chad. Chad not only planted a successful church up there, he's also on the Kern County High School Board. Okay? So you talk about a model of integration. Here's a guy who is immersed in local, especially county politics going on there. When he got elected as the Kern County High School Board, he got the highest number of votes of anybody ever running for a county-wide office. Okay? And so, but he also too, it knows that there's this line he has to walk between what he can do in the church and what he can't do in the church. But looking at a model of pastoral influence in the local community and politics, here's a guy who can preach well on Sunday and then go to the high school board on Thursday. Now here's some of the stuff that he's done. Besides being a conservative voice in Kern County, I mean, we think about how we got this bad. It's been done incrementally. How are we going to reverse it? Probably it's going to be incrementally at first, and then there's going to gain some momentum. So what did he do when his first year on the board? He got the support of a majority. They changed winter and spring break back officially to Christmas and Easter break. Okay, and all the liberals, you know, their foreheads were popping little bolts out of it, you know, going, you can't do that. But now it's officially Christmas and Easter break in Kern County. Okay, what's the next thing that made the liberals pop a corn nut out the side of their head, you know? And that was that he actually said, now the next thing is we put the national motto in every classroom, "In God We Trust." So I got that resolution, got it done, and now every single classroom, administrative office in the Kern County High School District is "In God We Trust." Okay, so you know, did that make the liberals angry? You bet. Was he acting completely within his pastoral and public guidelines, not only in the First Amendment but also working in the church to support it? Yep. So this is the kind of thing we can do incrementally to get things back. Start with the small things and make them get used to having "In God We Trust" in the class, calling it Christmas and Easter again, okay? And then you go to the next phase. You know, like they did it to us. They got this stuff over 40, 50 years, okay? It didn't all happen overnight. It was one decision at a time. I mean, 1940s is when we saw these, you know, Cantwell and Everson. We didn't get to the late 70s or 80s where we scrapped the 10 Commandments out of the schools and out of the courts. So it was taken issue by issue as they went. So anyway, with that, the point is there's lots of things pastors can do. They can be influential in a community and help turn things around if they have the right theology. And I can tell you my friend Chad Vegas has the right theology. He was my seminary student, okay? But he was already a good guy before he came anyway. So, all right, so what can pastors do? Pastors may privately endorse a candidate. I already told you that they can't do it, their church can't do it, and when a pastor does it, he has to be clear he's not doing it as an agent of the church, he's doing it as an individual. How do you make that clear? You state it. I'm so-and-so, you know, I'm not endorsing it in my capacity as a pastor of this church, but as an individual. You state it that way, and there you go. You've got the guidelines done. Now, pastors in personal politics. What else can pastors do? Pastors can participate fully in political committees that are independent of the church for which they work. So, when pastors participate in political committees and events, they should make sure that they state clearly they're acting as an individual and not as a representative of a particular church. So again, you can go to a political committee, you can go to, you know, a Republican or, you know, Constitution Party, whatever you're doing. Point is, they can get involved in that and help influence political committees, or even, you know, they can simultaneously be a pastor and hold political office. Okay? So these are the kinds of things that our leaders can do, and hopefully we've got pastors that are trained enough and are good enough to be able to do that. So, and again, clear stuff on this. Here's one that forget the fact that this is a good idea politically. For those who are, you know, into church growth stuff, how do you attract people to your church? Well, guess what? Churches can be used as polling places during elections. Okay? So you want to get people to your church, make it a polling place. Okay? You can do that. Okay? Petition the you know, the county, you know, the registrar's office, registrar of voters, and guess what? If nobody else has it, because that's a lot easier than you everybody trying to pull up in front of someone's house or park down the street, go in their garage and, pull the little things back. You usually have more parking on a church campus. You've got, probably some sort of large meeting room in the church, that's not the worship center where you could, set up the polls and the voting booths. And I mean, besides the fact that's going to get people, they're going to know your church is there, and they're going to be thinking about your church. So it's just good to bring people there. But you can use that to even make it easy for your own church people to know where to vote, right? If they live in the area. But again, that's one way the church can get involved in ensuring that politics go well, okay? A big don't in it is the church and political finances. Churches absolutely cannot make donations to a political campaign as a church, okay? In other words, candidates, parties like the Democrat or Republican Party or individual candidates, nothing partisan. That's the big, no. Can't do it. Can you expend resources to pass Prop 8? Yep, you can. Catholics did it, Mormons did it, individual Protestant churches did it. They did give resources over to these areas. So yes, churches can do it for issue advocacy. Remember the insubstantial criteria, but you can do that. So, all right, and a couple more here. Pastors and political finances. Point is, pastor is an individual. He can give as much money as he wants individually to any candidate or whatever he wants to do, and he can tell people that he gave money, just not using church, the church microphone during Sunday service to saying who he endorsed, because that's going to be an implied endorsement by the church. But he can tell people off campus, yeah, I gave money to so-and-so. Okay? And he gives as much as he wants. The problem is too many pastors, it's, they follow the Bible. Silver and gold I have none, but what I have I give to you, right? That's usually where a lot of pastors are at, unless they're on TBN when they're, okay, that's a whole area. You have the seed faith going on. So that's literally, that's it. That's what the church can and can't do in politics. And I think by the looks on your faces, you were surprised on how much we can actually do in the public square with respect to issues that are near and dear to our hearts. So any questions on that or anything you want to bring up on can or cannot, have not? Yes.
And I suspect your hope is that as we incrementally can take some things back, it might be a day where they could do this from the pulpit as they used to.
Yeah. Well, and that's for me, and for, people like the ADF Pulpit Initiative, it was wrong to restrict the churches on these areas. It was completely out of line, but at the same time, how much was really restricted? See, churches, like I said, we can still advocate for pro-life. We can still, do heterosexual marriage. Think about the main issues of our day. There's lots of things we can do as a church. We're just not doing them. We're not even doing what we can do today, okay? And again, you have to ask the question, why? And the reason why is it really comes back to the Bible and theology and our leadership, is that we do not have in our minds that God wants us involved in this sphere, okay? That's the current theology, is that that's worldly stuff. It doesn't have any benefit. So it doesn't get endorsed, preached from the pulpit. It's not seen in any of the activities of the church, promoted in adult or kids' Sunday school or anything else. So what are you left with? Anything that we do, we're on our own. And that we're doing it all as individual Christians. We're trying to get information as individual Christians. See, something like this should have been done in a local church, okay, as well as here. And this should be made available to all the Christians in the area for free, okay, as part of the educational ministry of the church. But here you are. You're here because you're political junkies, but which I am too. I don't say that in a bad way. I mean that in a good way. You're here because you care about the issues. So, other questions? Yeah.
Is that Restoration Act gaining any traction? Is it going anywhere?
It has had its ups and downs in the Congress. For a while, it was gaining supporters. I haven't checked on it since the last Congress began, but each time they got a couple of new sponsors for the bill that signed on to it. And at this point, there's some, there's some bipartisan support. You got both Republicans and Democrats that have some that have signed onto the bill. I think still at this point, there's more Republicans than Democrats. But, who knows? I mean, we hope that we could move on at this point. But this is, see, my point is even if we do get that passed, I think that would be nice, but there are probably bigger things. There are weightier matters of the law that we need to think about right now. Like, let's put it this way. If we got up to the line, everything I just said, all the churches were up here saying, man, if we could just endorse candidates now, okay? Where are they? They're over here, man. They're not even in the race, for most of us. So that's why pushing for a couple of people to endorse candidates, I really don't know what that would do to change things at this point. Maybe a couple of local races that might shift the balance, but I think overall that's not going to fix the problem we have. So, other questions? Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. The question was, we look at all the different Christian and conservative legal organizations out there. Should they all be together or should be separate? And I'll say this, number one, there's a lot of competition between the groups. And I know, so I've seen things, some for good, some for not so good, that I think, because a lot of it has to do with funding. A lot of it has to do with, when, let's just say, there's a big, prominent issue out there in case everybody's stampeding to get the plaintiff so they can be the ones to try and get the case to take it up to the Supreme Court, okay? And again, there's different motives for it. I mean, the funny is they're all there to help us, okay? And at the same time, they have to raise money, okay? And part of doing that is saying, well, here's what we're doing. We have this case, the Newdow case at the Supreme Court. We have this case here. And, so some of it is, look, a lot of these people, and I know some of them, these are people who they're lawyers who could be making a lot more money in private practice, but they're making peanuts doing, nonprofit, pro-Christian defense law. And, they got to pay, make their house payments, feed their families and things like that. So I don't fault them for one. I mean, yeah, it helps in your marketing to have to get the big cases, okay? Why give money to mine as opposed to the others? Because, look what we're doing. Others is that, it's good to have multiple groups because not all of them have the same judicial philosophy. I can say, for example, when Prop 22 was overturned, okay? This is something that I was a little disappointed that, the fact is it went through the California system, and because we had basically 1 month before it was implemented, and you were going to start having homosexual marriages in California. This was May 2008, and you had basically 30 days before you started. The county recorders had to start recording homosexual marriages, okay? So people, some of the legal groups say, well, let's go petition for a rehearing in the California Supreme Court. It's like, these are the ones who just said we don't want to, we overturned it, okay? They overturned Prop 22. Okay, then, but the problem is, all right, so then what are the other remedies? See, if you fail at the state level, where'd the Prop 8 people go? The federal courts, okay? And so I started checking with some of the, basically all the legal groups who were out there, and after they, repetitioned the California Supreme Court, it was like, nope, we're done. We'll just have to wait. Try the ballot proposition. It was like, no. I mean, because here's something that, again, I contacted all the organizations and said, no, here's another theory on how to do this. And because this was tried in Massachusetts when the Massachusetts State Supreme Court approved homosexual marriage, and for factual reasons, it didn't work. But here's one that, is important. See, and this is actually something that we need to think about as a strategy to curb judicial activism, okay? And if you've studied the Constitution, you know that the Constitution guarantees each state a Republican form of government, okay? That Republican form of government essentially means that you've got 3 separate branches acting as they should act, okay? So if the judiciary starts acting as the legislature, okay, do you have a Republican form of government anymore? See, and that's one that hasn't been tried yet, but that is the one that guarantees the states will have this. Well, if you've got the right theory in place, legislators should be legislatures, judges should be in the judiciary, and we should keep those functions separate. Well, here was the problem. The Massachusetts State Supreme Court, they invented this right to homosexual marriage. And of course, now the difference though is that in the Massachusetts Supreme Court is that they gave a 60-day reprieve, but it was 60 or 120 days before they were going to implement the decision. That gave time for the Massachusetts legislator to review it and decide whether or not they wanted to overturn it by legislation or do something like that. That's why when it went to the federal court, this was actually brought to the federal court, for that district in Massachusetts. I think it's the Fourth Circuit for Massachusetts. They said, yeah, well, we reject your appeal because, and it was a fact base, they had 120 days for the legislature to review it. They did review it, and they decided not to overturn it. So at that point, it wasn't a breach of a Republican form of government. What was happening in California? We only had 30 days. We had no time for a legislative review, okay? So we could have actually probably made the case in federal court to get an injunction on that, based on Republican form of government and looking at, I think it was the Fourth Circuit that had that case. But all these legal groups said, nah, and I can tell you one of them just said, no, we've been in, conference with, important, people in the United States government. We've decided we want to let the case ripen a little bit, and the different circuits before we bring a federal suit out of it. Really? Well, we here in California, we're being stomped on by the homosexual community, and we'd actually like something done. So that was the problem is and then finally I found a group that they decided they wanted to work with me on it, but it was too late. So that was you think about the kinds of things on why you might need different groups, because some of them have different kinds of cases that they specialize in. Some are more regional, some are not. I won't say which group it was, but when I first started doing theology and law integration, I had a pastor call me, and this is a guy who was having his church taken away from him by the Masons, okay? Why? Because, he is a Baptist pastor who refused to, essentially there was a memorial up in the church for some patron of the church. He refused to put the Masonic emblem up, next to it. And so the widow, of him, was basically sued the church for, all sorts of First Amendment violations. The Masons hired attorneys. This poor guy was losing his church, and he was, being personally sued for a couple $100,000, because because of a religious issue. And this was about 10, 12 years ago. So there's only a couple of big ones around at that time. And this one particular group said, oh, well, we don't want your case. It's not big enough, okay? So that's why, there's a lot of them that only take the quote-unquote big cases. And this is why, I've actually chosen to affiliate myself with the Pacific Justice Institute, because they turn no one away. Big, small, everyone gets help, okay? And it's pro bono. So, and there are others that do that too, but Pacific Justice is regional out here. They do things all over the United States, but they do most of the stuff in the Western region, the West Coast. So those are some of the things we think about how these Christian legal groups can help. They do help, and they do a lot of good work, but there is a little friction sometimes between them. I'll give one more example because it's public. After the Prop 8 decision was decided, again, there's one particular legal group that's handling the major federal Prop 8 case. Another Christian legal group that's back east came out and publicly criticized this other one for the way they handled the case, because they essentially said they could have done it better. Okay, so it's sometimes there's a little sniping and fighting among the groups, but so just got to be cautious about that. Okay, any other questions you have about anything churches can or can't do, how you should be restricted, or anything such as that? So anything at all? Yeah. Absolutely, that's a proposition. So That's issue advocacy. Okay? So, and again, as long as it doesn't explicitly or implicitly endorse a party or candidate, then that's fine. You see, and we saw that, again, the Mormons, the Catholics, and Protestants all got together, and they were for Prop 8. Okay, so that's where you saw that. Yeah, of course we can get together and do this stuff. Question.
Yeah, would conservative religious groups, would that help the cause?
Well, as far as pulling them in, as far as having Christian legal groups pull them in fact, is the legal groups are the legal groups, but also is these groups don't only defend Christians; they'll defend any religious liberty that goes on. So you're not usually not going to find them turning away anyone, whether they're Jews, Muslims, or anyone else. So that's what they, most of these people can point to. These organizations can point to because see, a decision for a Muslim is going to affect us too. So that's why I usually don't see their cases restricted to being only for Christians or representing Christians. Well, see, this is our reasoning here. Why is it you hear that the Mormons and Catholics are doing something, but you never hear something about Protestants? And the answer is because they are huge organizations and they have representatives that are very public, that are dedicated to this kind of stuff. And they're collectively, as national and international churches, they're recognized as having people who can do this. I can tell you when the Prop 22 was overturned, Craig Hazen and I and Dr. Corey had a meeting with a entourage from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. There were 2 Mormon apostles, a couple from the Quorum of the 70. We met in Dr. Corey's office and we talked about how to overturn Prop 22. The Mormons initiated it. Huh? How to deal with the overturning of Prop 22. So that was, but they initiated the meeting. They were going all over the state trying to build, help build coalitions. And of course, at that point, you want to be careful when you're building any coalition. You're not tacitly endorsing, the theology of these groups. But certainly, as we did, the Prop 8 Legal Defense Fund and things like that, people did all contribute to a single fund eventually. And you got protectmarriage.org, the Prop 8 Legal Defense Fund, and there are multiple sources that were funding that, from different religions. So it ended up as, in effect, a conservative amalgamation of funds and people working together. So I saw a couple other questions too. Which, by the way, the last part of the class, Dr. Waller and I, we left this for you to give you a lot of time for open questions. For anything we haven't covered, we could talk for, the next 20, 50 hours on the kinds of things that we know. But we wanted to let you raise issues that maybe you want to know a little bit about. So this is your time for that, as far as Q&A time. Yeah.
I know there's probably many intricate.
Yeah, good question, and the answer is probably so, because what you see as the trend going on right now. Let's say you say, all right, you've got homosexual marriage that again you find that, let's say worst comes to worst, okay, and here's by the way, here's where we're at right now in the Prop 8 case. The question is if things go badly on the Prop 8 case, are we going to have restrictions on what pastors and churches can say on the nature of homosexuality? And I think it's likely, yes, that we are going to see that. And is it likely going to go bad? Yeah, I think it is. And here's why. Because if we look at what happened with the federal case, you found that Judge Vaughn Walker, of course, he had his 130 plus page opinion and decided that it was a violation of equal protection and a fundamental right to marry. Okay, now where's it at right now? Okay, the briefs are in, as far as the opening appellant briefs on the case. There's 2 main parties right now. There's the ones who did the Prop 8 campaign, and so you understand why there's a second, appellant here that intervened in the case at the trial level. It's because there was a question on whether or not somebody who ran the campaign has a standing to appeal it, or even to bring a lawsuit because they didn't like what happened when it was overturned. So who's going to have standing, a specific outcome in the case? Clearly, and this is why advocates for faith and freedom, actually they're representing Imperial County in California, because a county registrar who's going to have to issue homosexual marriage certificates has a stake in the outcome of the case. See, they would clearly have standing for it because it does affect them. Okay, so they'll need to have that. So where it's at now is briefs are in. What we're waiting now is for reply briefs, and then finally there's going to be a hearing on it in December. The Ninth Circuit, aka the Ninth Circus, right, the most liberal, federal circuit in the federal judiciary, has overturned the most at the Supreme Court. You've got a 3-judge panel, and that's the way it works at the appellate. Usually there's a panel that you have from the number of justices of that particular circuit. So you get 3, and if you get 2 out of 3 that vote for it for whatever reason, that's the opinion. The point is that this is such a huge issue. No matter what happens at the Ninth Circuit, okay, win or lose, the losing party will petition the Supreme Court to hear the case. And because it is such a huge issue all around the country, it is likely that this will be ripe for the Supreme Court to hear it, because it's affected, there's a lot of states that have by judicial decree homosexual marriage. They're restricting it. So you're going to see a petition for writ of certiorari made to the U.S. Supreme Court after the Ninth Circuit gives their decision on that. So now, when you look at the court and its makeup right now, where's it at? You're going to see you've got 4 clear votes on both sides. They're going to be for and against this. Okay, who's the swing vote on this? Kennedy, Justice Kennedy. Now you look at Justice Kennedy's track record on this issue; it's not good. Okay. And because why? Justice Kennedy was the one who wrote the opinion about the Amendment 2 Colorado case that said when Colorado said, we passed an amendment to the Colorado Constitution, Amendment 2, that said, didn't persecute homosexuals, says we're not going to recognize them as a special or suspect class. Because there was a trend back in the early 90s at that point to start recognizing homosexuals as a suspect class, and the people of Colorado said, we don't want that for our state. We're not taking away any rights. We're just not going to recognize them as a suspect class. We consider it's a behavior group. It's not going to happen. So what happened? Justice Kennedy, who remember was the replacement for Bork in 1987, back it was 1990, I think, 91 this case came up. So he's the one that penned the opinion on that, and he basically said, nope, overturned it because it's animus towards homosexuals, a discrete and insular minority. So it's animus, okay, towards them. You can't have that. Why? Okay, doesn't matter. Fast forward about another decade, and then what do you get with Justice Kennedy in 2003? Lawrence v. Texas. Okay, and he got the other 4 justices to sign on or overturn Bowers versus Hardwick. Say, homosexuality was not a federal issue. Thus, in 1986, 5-4 decision, in a decision that Justice Scalia wrote, it was that, yes, states can, as they have been since the inception of the country, criminalize sodomy if they think it's appropriate to do so, because there's nothing in the federal Constitution that says we have a say in whether or not a state will criminalize sodomy. Right? 5-4 decision. 10 years later, actually 86, almost 20 years later, 2003, what you've got now is Kennedy and the left side of the court saying, no, now there is a right to this and you can't criminalize it anymore, okay? Based on the right of privacy where we got abortion, now we've got the right to be a homosexual, okay? Yeah.
Can I just add 2 quick things to that?
Absolutely.
The importance of the Romer case in '96 was,
Yeah.
and Kevin alluded to this, was that Justice Kennedy wrote an opinion in that case arguing that the only motivation that the court could discern from the populace of Colorado for not approving special rights for gays and lesbians there was a hateful religious animus.
Yep.
And went further to argue that those kinds of motivations are to have no basis in our laws.
Yep.
Now, the other piece of this, and maybe I'll try to, Jimmy's told me how our problems here with the computer might be solved. I might fire up while Kevin answers a few more questions here to give you the verbiage from a case in 1992 that has been used by courts both at the federal level and at the state level to increase or to add under the protection of liberty rights under the 14th Amendment, this famous mystery clause that was elucidated by Justice Kennedy in 1992 in the Casey decision. Maybe I'll fire that up while you address some more issues there.
Casey. So anyway, that's this. So essentially, what we see with the Prop 8 case is, again, Kennedy is the swing vote on it. So if we look at where this is going, it is likely that probably in about a year, we are going to see, probably Kennedy is going to, again, it doesn't look good. He may surprise us and decide that they can't find a right to marry based on homosexuality, but right now it's not looking good. So that's where it's at. Now what you have right now, there's another set of cases that are coming up through the system, and that is this, and this is something that, the problem is, say when states started, when judges started granting homosexual marriage in the states, what we had in Congress again, several years ago, is they passed the Defense of Marriage Act, DOMA. Okay? Now, here's the problem with that, the Defense of Marriage Act, is that there is a full faith and credit clause in the U.S. Constitution that in some says one state has to recognize the official acts and judicial decisions of another state. Okay? This is why you can hop in the car, drive across the border to Nevada, get married in the middle of the night, come back to California, and you're recognized as being married in California. Okay? Because you're recognizing an official marriage license that's given in that state. It's an official act recognized, and it's a license that's given. So what happens now when one state recognizes homosexual marriages, everybody flies to Massachusetts, and now they want to go back and be recognized as a married couple in California, Tennessee, Georgia. Well, immediately it was like, no, we don't want to do this, so we've got Defense of Marriage Act, okay? So, which essentially said that the states don't have to recognize these things. Well, what's the problem with that? See, federal statute, federal constitution, full faith and credit clause, DOMA statute. It says they don't have to recognize it. So there are cases right now that are challenging DOMA, okay? So again, that's another way that they're getting it through the courts. So when you get to, can you end up restricting a pastor from speaking from the pulpit? Well, it could be considered, are they trying to, conspiracy to deny someone their constitutional rights by advocating against it, advocating something that's illegal, okay, possibly. But where we're going right now on that, that probably won't do it. What will do it are the hate speech laws that they're trying to get enacted. And what you see in Canada and the UK are these laws that basically bar hate speech, okay? Things that, now if you get into constitutional law and First Amendment free speech law, this is trying to enact some vague, but basically fighting words doctrine. Fighting words can be restricted if they're inducing people to imminent, lawless, violent action and things like that. So to say someone is a homosexual or to say something mean, the whole point is that's supposed to induce people to imminent, lawless action. Now, right now, one of the last times this was decided, RAV versus City of St. Paul, is that we won. You can't have hate speech laws in the United States. They're void for vagueness. But as Dr. Waller and I both know, the opposition never sleeps, just like on homosexual marriage. They're going to push and push and push, just like they've pushed in all the European countries and Canada to get these things in place. That's where they want to go. So that's when you're going to see, like you saw in Canada, you're going to get some examples of that. Canada, a pastor took out an ad in the newspaper quoting the book of Leviticus 18 and 20 against homosexuality, and he was charged with an anti-genocide statute just for taking out an ad in the paper quoting the Bible. Right now you've got there was a London couple, it's about 2-3 months ago, owned a hotel, was arrested. Basically they're being prosecuted. I can't remember if they were arrested or not, or just called into court. But the article clearly said they witnessed to a Muslim in the lobby of their own hotel. The Muslim complained that it was offensive speech and they're being prosecuted. This is in Liverpool. Sorry, it was in London, it was Liverpool. So this is the kind of stuff that is going on. Christians in what we thought are, whoever thought that the Church of England, the West, the home of all these things, it would happen there. But this is where we're going to see this stuff happen when the hate speech laws come in. This is what they want, and they're not going to give up till they get them, because that's when they can really silence us and jail us. Yeah. No, any 501c3 religious organization can do all those things. When I say churches, it's because present company, but it'd be any 501c3 religious organization. They can do all those things.
Yeah.
So.
But would mosques have the same restrictions?
No, they are restricted. I mean, whether it's a Wiccan coven, whether it's, anything, everyone who's a 501c3 religious corporation is bound by those restrictions. So you cannot do this. So pastor, replace it with, imam, or, rabbi, or, Starhawk, the head goddess witch, or whatever it happens to be. That's the, so that's just, that's the corporate size 501c3 religion, which primarily in the United States are churches, but there are others. There are, synagogues, temples, mosques, and so forth. So any other questions you've got before I turn it over to Dr. Waller, so we can just entertain you with all sorts of fun. All right, go ahead, brother.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.